كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to this second semester discussion on the seer, and this is lesson 8, alhamdulillah. So let us get right back in. We were discussing when the jihad begins, once the options have been exhausted for them becoming Muslim or paying jizya, then traditionally you're allowed to attack them. So he's going to be discussing how you start attacking them, preparation, equipment, setting up attack points, and then the ethics of this is very interesting. You know, what can you deprive of them of? What can you ban? What can you allow? What is not allowed to be banned going into the area? And then the discussion about whether if there's Muslims within them, then how do you deal with the ethics of that? Because you may be attacking the Muslims, you may be considered attacking, if there's children there. So all of that will be discussed there, how you intend these things, what's your perspective on these things, how you deal with it. Then it discusses what you're allowed to do in terms of operational maneuvers, in terms of the people there, with the women there, with the children there, with other things down there. Then can you use non-Muslims in battle? So a lot of this discussion will be taking place. There's discussion of the ethics of how to deal with any spoils of war. Can the combatants just take things for themselves? Is there a particular procedure of dealing with whatever is captured as the booty or the spoils of war? So these are the discussions that we will be having. Who you're not allowed to kill, who you're not allowed to combat with, who you're not allowed to harm in any way. So for example, women, are you allowed to harm women, or older people, or blind people, and so on? So there's a whole nuanced discussion about that as well. So inshallah we will begin from page 248, which is وَإِنْ أَبَوْا إِسْتَعَانُوا بِاللَّهِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَحَارَبُوهُم. If they refuse the two options, then seek assistance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then start the combat, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will assist. وَنَصَبُوا عَلَيْهِمْ الْمَجَانِيقِ جَمْعُ مَنْجَنِيقِ. This is, in those days you can set up your catapult. So obviously today is going to be a whole different set of equipment, right? And then he says وَحَرَّقُوهُمْ لِأَنَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ أَحْرَقَ الْبُوَيْرَةِ وَهِيَ مَوْضِعٌ بِقُرْبِ الْمَدِينَةِ. There's also the permissibility of starting fires there, burning some aspects of their land to try to force them out, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ did that in a place called Buwaira. It's also allowed to flood certain parts of their areas if that helps to get rid of the siege, right? وَقَطَعُوا شَجَرَهُمْ. You're allowed to cut some of the trees that they may be defending themselves by or using for a particular reason. وَأَفْسَدُوا زُرُوعَهُمْ. You're allowed to also destroy their crops, right? لأنه في ذلك كسر شوكتهم وتفريق جمعهم, because that will cause disarray there, and that will also be something to destroy their fortitude, right? So ولا بأس برميهم وإن كان فيهم مسلم أسير أو تاجر. Then this is the contentious issue. Well, this is the complicated issue, that if among them are prisoners of war, if among them are Muslim prisoners of war, or there are just some non-combatants like business people or whatever, just innocent people, how are you supposed to do that? Can you not attack? He says وَلَا بَأْسَ بِرَمِّهِمْ وَإِنْ كَانَ فِيهِمْ مُسْلِمٌ أَسِيرٌ أَوْ تَاجِرٌ. Now remember, this is not like these indiscriminate bombing campaigns where you'll definitely be destroying more innocent people than you will be possibly maybe destroying an enemy combatant. In those days it was more like hand-to-hand combat, maybe with a few catapults and maybe something else, but it wasn't the massive destruction on a grand scale where you're going to take out whole neighborhoods of completely innocent people. This is talking about being as careful as possible, saying that there's no harm in attacking the actual actual combatants, right? The actual enemies, right? Even if among them there's a few Muslim prisoners, or there's a few tajirin, which means tujjar, traders. لأنه قل ما يخلو حسن عن Muslim, because seldom is it that there won't be a Muslim complete, there'll be no Muslims at all. There's always going to be some Muslim there, but it's going to be a minority. فلو امتنع باعتباره لانسد بابه. And if you were to desist because there's one or two Muslims possibly there, then the whole door of jihad would be closed. The whole door of repelling an attack, or a effective means of bringing the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to people would be stopped. Now what happens if they literally put up shields of Muslims or children of Muslims, or some Muslim prisoners in front of their tanks, like happens today? وَإِن تَتَرَصَّوْا بِصِبْيَانِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. That's obviously wrong to do, but if they do try to defend themselves and using human shields of Muslim children or Muslim prisoners, لَمْ يَكُفُوا عَنْ رَمْيِهِمْ. You're not going to stop because of that. You'll have to continue to attack, because that's just going to be an easy distraction ploy. لأنه يؤدي إلى أن يتخذوا ذلك ذريعة إلى إبطال قتالهم أصلا, because they're always going to then use that, because they know that that's the way you will desist. They'll just put up. They'll actually then find some Muslims to put up on there. ولكن يقصدون بالرمي الكفار. However, it's so particular that when you are in this situation and you have to fire, then your intention is the non-Muslim, is not the Muslim. Obviously, that's unfortunately a collateral damage in that case. لأن المسلم لا يجوز اعتماد قتله. It's not permissible to deliberately kill a Muslim. It's not permissible to deliberately kill a Muslim unless they are somebody who have violated something and it becomes permissible for some other reason. فإذا تعذر التمييز فعلا وأمكن قصدا التزم. That's why while it may be difficult to distinguish between who's a Muslim, who's not Muslim there, who you might be killing, right, because of the possibility there's a minority of Muslim there, right, you can at least do it in your intention, right? Even if you can't do it physically, where you can't be discriminate like that, you have to, since it's possible through intention, that's why we have to do it that way. لأن الطاعة بحسب الطاقة, because obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is based on capacity. Here we have the capacity to do it at least in intention, right, in focus, in the direction of it. وما أصابوه منهم. Now if there is a Muslim person who is then inflicted, there's going to be no la diyata alayhim. There's no blood wit to be paid for that, because that was unfortunately collateral damage in that sense. Wala kafara, and no compensation to be paid for the Muslims to have done that. Lal jihad, لأن الجهاد فرض, because in this case the jihad was a fard, was an obligation. That was the means of survival. والغرامات لا تقترن بالفروض, and you can't have a compensation related to something you're obligated to do. Meaning, if you have to do something in a particular way, you can't have to pay a compensation usually, right, for the way you did it. كما في الهداية, unless you did some other aggression. Now it discusses the ruling of removing the women and mushafs with the Muslims during the qital. So ولا بأس بإخراج النساء والمصاحف. Not removing, but rather taking with you, removing from their homes to take with you. Are you allowed to take women with you, right, for a battle, to assist in a particular capacity? Are you allowed to carry Qurans with you? Nowadays people might have it on their phones, but physical Qurans. The reason is that if you get attacked and captured, they might desecrate the Quran. So are you allowed to take Qurans with you? Well, you might need them to read, right? So kutub al-fiqh, in fact, are you allowed to take books of jurisprudence with you as well? Well, hadith and hadith books, meaning anything that is obligatory for us to revere and respect. The problem is that we're taking them into a dangerous area and they may be disrespected, right? So are you allowed to take them in the first place? وَيَحْرُمُ الْإِسْتِخْفَافِ بِهِ, which it is impermissible to look down upon and to denigrate in any way, and you might cause it denigration if you take it. It says مَعَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ إِذَا كَانَ عَسْكَرًا عَظِيمًا يُؤْمَنَ عَلَيْهِ. Yes, if the Muslim forces are huge, usually the expectation is that they're going to be secure, then yes, you're allowed to take it, because if they're treated as, if we're hoping that they're going to remain secure, then maybe the Quran, etc., that they take them will be secure. But don't take it when it's a more dangerous mission of a few people, because then if you do get captured, the Quran, they're going to desecrate it. لأن الغالب هو السلامة, because in the case where it's a huge army of Muslims that are not going to be overcome so easily, if at all, then the dominant case there is that they're going to stay safe. وَالْغَالِبْ كَالْمُتَحَقَّقْ, and we're going to just treat that as the reality. So yes, you're allowed to take it because they're going to need to do so. As I said, these days it might be easier now because you can just have it on your phones or some other device, right, which are not actually Quran in themselves. وَيُكْرَهُ إِخْرَاجُ ذَلِكَ فِي سَرِيَّةٍ لَا يُؤْمَنْ عَلَيْهِ. That's why it'd be makruh to take these kind of venerated articles and products in any kind of expedition that is a highly dangerous one, where they're not necessarily, the probability of safety is lower, right? لأن فيه تعريضهن على الضياء والفضيحة, because then you're exposing these things. Of course, you're exposing yourself, but then you're exposing these things as well, which are not necessary, to being denigrated, desecrated, and insulted. وتعريض المصاحف على الاستخفاف لأنهم يستخفون بها مغايظة للمسلمين, because they will purposely, if they do capture this contingent, then they will purposely denigrate the Quran just to spite the Muslims. وهو التأويل الصحيح لقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تسافر بالقرآن في أرض العدو. So that's why there's a hadith which actually says that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, do not travel to enemy lands with the Quran, with the Mus'haf. That means if you're traveling there on business or you're traveling there for some visit, you're not allowed to take it? No, of course you are. It's just saying that don't take it when you're in a situation where you could be captured and persecuted and the Quran denigrated. That is the context he's saying is appropriate for this hadith. وَلَوْ دَخَلَ مُسْلِمٌ إِلَيْهِمْ بِأَمَانٍ. That's why if a Muslim is to enter their lands with a visa, with safety, authorization, لَا بَأْسَ بِأَنْ يَحْمِلْ مَعَهُ الْمُصْحَفِ. Nothing wrong with then taking a mushaf, a copy of the Quran with you, إِذَا كَانُوا قَوْمًا يُعْرَفُونَ بِالْأَحْدِ, as long as they're people who are known to fulfill their contracts. They're not people who will give you a visa and then attack you. لأن الظاهر عدم التعرض, because the apparent situation and expectation in that case is that you're not going to be attacked, you're not going to be confronted, you're not going to be negatively dealt with, and there's going to be not that much harm to the Quran and the Mus'haf. وَالْعَجَائِزْ يُخْرَجْنَ فِي الْعَسْكَرِ الْعَظِيمِ. Older women are allowed to be taken in larger army formations, لِإِقَامَةِ عَمَلٍ يَلِيقُ بِهِنَّ, so that they can do work that befits them, like they could cook for the army, وَالسَّقِي, they could water the army, وَالْمُدَاوَات, they could also treat them medically as well. وَأَمَّا الشَّوَابِ, however, younger women, youth, right? فَمُقَامَهُنَّ فِي الْبُيُوتِ, they should stay at home. Their safety is there, and there's less fitna if there's absence of younger women there, because people are going to be away for a while, and obviously there's a sexual attraction and there's a sexual need as well. Otherwise people will get into bad actions. أدفع للفتنة, which is more superior for removing any kind of temptation. ولا يباشرن القتال لأنه يستدل به على ضعف المسلمين إلا عند الضرورة. And they got an interesting idea. He's saying that you can't use women to fight, because that would be taken as a source of weakness, that hey, you don't have enough men to be able to fight, so you have to use your women. Ya Allah, right? That's in the battlefield, obviously. And وَلَا يُسْتَحَبُّ إِخْرَاجُهُنَّ لِلْمُبَاضَعَةِ. What about if it's a long expedition and men are going to need their wives or whatever? Are you allowed to take the women folk with you, or to do some other kind of service? So in that case, فَإِنْ كَانُوا لَابُدَّ مُخْرِجِينَ فَبِالْإِمَاءِ دُونَ الْحَرَائِرِ, which is no longer applicable. That is saying that if you do have to take women, then you're better off taking slave girls than free women. But of course, that's not a possibility today. So that will remain a fatwa for today as to whether you can take women or not. Now, in the case of women, it says, وَلَا تُقَاتِلُ الْمَرْأَ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ زَوْجِهَا. A free woman, she is not allowed to go out in the battle and fight except with her husband's permission. And likewise, a slave can't do it without his master's permission, for when that was relevant, because we already mentioned earlier that that is the right of the husband or the master. right? إلا أن يهجم العدو, unless it's a case of general conflict where you're being completely attacked and it's a survival issue, it's an existential issue. لسيرورته فرض عين, in that case obviously it becomes a individual obligation, so then they can go even without permission. Now the next discussion is about the rules and regulations of what you're allowed and what you're not allowed to do in a battle with the enemy. Very important discussion. Mostly all enemies will have that, right? Will have that discussion. I've been to Sandhurst and other army barracks where they've talked about the civil side of things in terms of the ethical side of things. So they have a whole ethics there. Unfortunately, what seems to happen, it looks like, is that while any good army, right, any organized army will have an ethics, right? However, when things get on the battlefield, there's not always a follow-up of that. There's not always a focus on that. There's a heat of the moment. It looks like people do a lot of stuff, and sometimes that might be even top down, that it's all right, just do it, and we'll just turn the blind eye as such to it. So it looks like it definitely happens. It's happened with the forces in Iraq and in other places, you know, with even the major, very developed Western forces, UK, US. It's obviously happened, right? Where and it's clearly happening today, right? So you can tell that while they say that they're a very moral army, they have morality built in and so on, there's definitely things that go wrong, right? And that's very, because when people are battling, from what I'm hearing, when people are battling, then they get angry. They have, obviously they have to be riled up, and sometimes that riling up causes them very difficult for a person to, it might be very difficult for a person to be ethical in that regard. That's why the Muslims paid a lot of emphasis to this, and they would constantly have this discussion. You know, the Prophet ﷺ actually forbade it. Not only did it, he actually then would really tell off and sometimes even punish people who did aggression, right, against non-Muslims. Even in a battle situation, he was very angry, right, to do that, because the ethics have to be maintained. Otherwise, you're not seen as moral anymore, right? There's a psychological warfare taking place at the same time. There's a psychological warfare taking place at the same time, and a person has to be very careful what impression they provide. It's not just about just cause massive chaos and corruption and destruction, genocide, and then try to control. You lose a lot in that regard, because human beings don't like that overall, right? And nobody survives. The Mongols didn't survive, right? The Mongols didn't survive. So why would anybody else survive? That's why he's saying, وَيَنْبَغِي لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ أَنْ لَا يَغْدِرُوا. It is necessary for the Muslims to not do ghadr, right? Which means to deceive in any sense. Oh yes, there is a part of battle which is seen as a deception, in a strategic impressions that you provide of what you're going to do, and then you provide and you hide your real intent. But clear deception, where you make a treaty with somebody, you go on against that, you're not allowed to do that. But in terms of your strategy, what you imply in terms of how you show your formations, or how you show what you're going to do or what you're not going to do, where it's not a contract based, then that is obviously just a tactic and a strategy of war, which is without that you wouldn't really win a war, right? Element of surprise and so on. However, if you given your word for something, you can't go against that. That's what it's talking, وَلَا يَغْدِرُوا. And that's why even Imam al-Haskafi, author of Durr al-Mukhtar, which is one of the main texts of the Hanafi school, right? He says, Nuhina min an ghadrin wa ghululin. We've been prohibited to be deceptive in betraying a trust, betraying a contract, and ghulul, and which means that to steal from the spoils of war, right? The word yambaghi is being used here. Which is a bit stronger than yandubu, because the word yambaghi can come usually in the meaning of appropriate, but it also comes in the meaning of necessary in many cases. That's why Imam Ibn Abidin says under that section, he says that وَإِنْ كَانَ فِي عُرْفِ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ إِسْتِعْمَالُهُ فِي أَعَمٍ مِّن ذَلِكَ, that usually the word yambaghi he's saying that لأن المشهور عند المتأخرين استعمال ينبغي بمعنى يندب. The later scholars usually use the word ينبغي in the meaning of يندب, which means that it is recommended, right? And لا ينبغي as not recommended. So if something is not recommended, it means that it's actually makruh tanzihi, the lighter form of dislike. However, in the earlier sources, the earlier scholars, they would have a more universal meaning of ينبغي, right? That's why Ibn Abidin has quoted from the Al-Misbah al-Munir that وَيَنْبَغِي أَن يَكُونَ كَذَا, meaning يَجِبُ أو يندب. So in some contexts it actually refers to obligation, and in some cases it refers to recommendation, just depending on what that situation is or what that particular predicament or case is, right? So that's why ينبغي is not always has the same translation of just being recommended, although that is its kind of literal meaning. So it says أن يخونوا بنقض العهد, which means that they're not allowed to betray by breaking a contract. So you say that in your contract, you say, okay, there's going to be a ceasefire, there's going to be no attack for 5 days, and then you actually attack. You're not allowed to do that. But if you implied, for example, you're not in a contract that, hey, we're receding, and then you go and attack, that would be fine, because there was no contract. You know, once you've given your word, you have to stick to that. Muslims have to stick to that. وَلَا يَغُلُّ, that means don't steal from the spoils of war, right? Because you're not allowed to steal. There's a way that the leader of the Muslim army will divide whatever it is, you know, depending on the context of that time. وَلَا يُمَثِّلُ, you're not allowed, also the Muslim army is not allowed to mutilate bodies. That's tamthil, right, of the bodies, right? However much you hate the enemy. بأن يشقوا أجوافهم, in the sense that you tear apart their stomach. ويرضخ رؤوسهم ونحو ذلك, or crush their heads. Like after you've killed them, you're not allowed to do anything further. They're dead, finish. But you're not allowed to then go and then break their heads just for the sake of it, like as has been seen, other immoral armies doing, basically. والمثلة المروية في قصة العرانيين منسوخة من نهي المتأخر. There is a story about the Uraniyin tribe who had, Prophet ﷺ had allowed them to settle there and allowed them for the sake of a cure to benefit from the camel and so on. But then what they did was they deceived and betrayed that trust by killing the herds people and stealing the camels and so on. So the Prophet ﷺ punished them, and in this case he punished them with a form of a bodily wound or a mutilation. So he's saying that yes, that was there, but that was a very temporary particular context which is no longer allowed because that has been abrogated, right? That was abrogated. That's why Imam the author of Al-Jawharat al-Tawheed, which is another more detailed commentary of the Quduri, says وَإِنَّمَا تُكْرَهُ الْمُثْلَةُ بَعْدَ الظَّفَرِ بِهِمْ. What it means by no mutilation is sometimes you have to attack them and they get mutilated in that. That's unavoidable sometimes. But what it means is that after you have killed them, right? After you've apprehended them, they're under your control as a prisoner of war. You're not allowed to commit any of these, like what these people are doing, raping and all this other stuff that we hear about other immoral enemies doing. You're not allowed to do any of that because you've caught them now. They're under your control. They're in your power. That's all you need now. Or you've killed them, then you're not allowed to do anything beyond that as well. However, before that, in order to fight with them and destroy them, if there's some mutilation in that regard, then that's allowed, right? That would be allowed because that's inevitable. That would be part of the process. Then it says, you're not allowed, وَلَا يَقْتُلُ إِمْرَأَةً, you're not allowed, this is page 254, you're not allowed to kill women or really old men who are not battling, right? وَهُوَ الَّذِي فَنِيَتْ قُوَاهُ, in somebody who doesn't have any energy to fight. وَلَا صَبِيًّا, you're not allowed to kill and harass children. You're not allowed to do that to the blind people, nor anybody who's disabled and who can't fight, because they're not people of combat, right? What is allowed, it's only allowed to attack somebody if you think they're going to attack you. If these people can't attack you, then why would you do that? The only reason it's allowed, I said that attacking somebody is not intrinsically a beautiful thing. It's not a good thing. It's extrinsically allowed for other reasons to bring about peace. If these people aren't doing anything wrong, why would you do that? Just for that reason. Unless one of these people have some say in the battle, right? Unless they are strategizing, they're providing some kind of assistance, then they become combatants in that regard. They become combatants. Then obviously, and sometimes in terms of strategy, you may find that there's some older people who can't battle anymore, but they're providing all of the strategy from behind, then they would become fair game as well in a battle. Unless there is another case where you're allowed to attack women, is that she is the commander, she is the leader, she is the president, she is the prime minister, or whatever it is. لأن في قتلها تفريقا لجمعهم, because sometimes then to take the head down, it creates such a disarray that it diffuses the whole situation. أو ساحرة, subhanallah, or she's the magician, ya Allah. So they've even taken into consideration spells, because enemies do use spells, right? And there's a belief in them, and they try anything and they try everything. So if that's the case, we believe in magic anyway. So if she's a magician, if she's a witch, then you're allowed to do that. Then she's not protected category, right? وَكَذَا إِذَا كَانَ مَلِكُمْ صَبِيًّا صَغِيرًا. And okay, what happens if their leader, and it has happened in the past, in monarchies as such, it doesn't usually happen in, in democracies as such, it happens in monarchies, is when the leader or the emperor, the king or the sultan is a child, right? And they've brought him to, he's not sitting in, the capital somewhere, but he's like, they've brought him to the to the battlefield. And if you did finish the child off, then it would basically end the war. Then that would probably be a better idea. فَلَا بَأْسَ بِقَتْلِهِ, then there's no harm in killing that child in that particular case. Remember, all of this has to be contextualized, right? So don't take this all out of context. وَلَا يَقْتُلُ مَجْنُونًا. You're also not allowed to attack and kill insane people who are not in the right frame of mind, and they're not harmful at all, because they're obviously not even responsible beings, unless of course they come in the battlefield and they're doing some battle as well. Then you can obviously fight with them even though they're unaccountable, but you can fight them because they're harming you, right? غير أن الصبي والمجنون يقتلان ما دام يقاتلان. Except when it comes to children and these insane people who are dealing, with a level of insanity and madness, you're only allowed to fight them when they're actually fighting and attacking you, because they go through bouts, right? وغيرهما لا بأس بقتله بعد الأسر لأنه من أهل العقوبة لتوجه الخطاب نحوه. Whereas anybody else, even after getting them, even after capturing them, you're allowed to kill even afterwards, because that's one of the options to do away with the enemy, is because this will be a punishment for them. This will be seen as a punishment. But when it comes to children and insane people, you're not allowed to kill them after you've apprehended them, right? Because of the status of their mind, right? They could have been doing it for different reasons, or could have been forced to do it, or been indoctrinated, or whatever the case. So you're not allowed to kill them afterwards, though normal combatants can be killed, because this will be seen as a punish for them. And then it discusses al-muwada'a wal-hudna fil harbi. So now this is discussing وَإِذَا رَأَى الْإِمَامُ أَن يُصَالِحَ أَهْلَ الْحَرْبِ عَلَى تَرْكِ الْقِتَالِ مَعَهُمْ أَوْ فَرِيقًا مِّنْهُمْ مَجَّانًا أَوْ عَلَى مَالٍ مِنَّا أَوْ مِنْهُمْ وَكَانَ فِي ذَلِكَ مَصْلَحَةٌ لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ فَلَا بَأْسَ بِهِ. Interesting. If there's a way to stop the war, to stop the battle, and to make peace, right, to settle on something and make some peace. So he's saying that if the imam, the Muslim imam, commander, leader, sees and feels and deems that if he made peace with the enemies, right, to stop the war between them, or at least a group with them, even for free, without taking anything from them, without asking for any kind of compensation for that, or even to pay in this case, for us to pay them to just stop it, because that's the better option. You'd rather pay them some ransom for this to stop the battle, or take payment from them. Depend on the strategy here, and depends on the context as to who's stronger, right? rather than fight, if you can just get them to pay you something, or you pay them something if you're in, you can say, the weaker position. وَكَانَ فِي ذَلِكَ مَصْلَحَةٌ لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ, and they see that there is something for the welfare of the Muslims in that. It's better for the Muslims to just take that case, and of course that's going to be a strategy issue, right? فَلَا بَأْسَ بِهِ, then he's allowed to do that. There's no harm in doing that. لأن الموادع جهاد معنى, because ultimately a peace agreement is also a form of jihad. It's a strategy as part of it, because maybe you need to do that to regroup. Maybe you need to do that for whatever purpose it is, right? Get more equipment or whatever it is. إذا كان خير للمسلمين, as long as people agree that this is for the benefit of the Muslims. لأن المقصود وهو دفع الشر حاصل به, because ultimately the ulterior purpose of removing and repelling the harm has been achieved by doing this, instead of doing the worst act, which is to actually fight about it. So fighting is not always the first cause or the first recourse. بخلاف ما إذا لم يكن خيرا, unless it's just it's bad for the Muslims to do that, and a person, despite the fact that they would have won, they still did that for some wrong reason. And of course, if it's bribery, then it wouldn't be allowed at all, right? لأنه ترك الجهاد صورة ومعنى, because if he did it for no purpose, then both in reality and in essence, in terms of its ultimate goal, you're missing out on jihad. And the rest of that discussion is in the Hidayah. فَإِنْ صَالَحَهُمْ مُدَّةً مَعْلُومَةً, so if the Muslims Imam does have a peace agreement with them for a particular amount of time, 4 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever it is, ثُمَّ رَأَى أَنَّ نَقْضَ الصُّلْحِ أَنْفَعُ, but then after that he realizes that now it's a time to restart the battle, which means that but you've got a contract in place, you've got an agreement in place, then نَبَذَ إِلَيْهِمْ عَهْدَهُمْ, then what you have to do is you have to actually throw the treaty back at them, which means you have to cancel it. You have to warn them, you have to tell them that we've cancelled it now. You can't just go and attack them when they're thinking that you're abiding by it. So you have to tell them that, you know, we're cancelling now because we've seen that it's beneficial. So you can cancel these things, but you have to inform them. وَقَاتَلَهُمْ, and then you can go back in combat with them. لأن المصلحة لما تبدلت كان النبذ جهادا, because when the ultimate purpose to attain that has changed, when the circumstances have changed, then it means that holding back is no longer even jihad in essence, right? وَإِيفَاءُ الْأَهْدِ تَرْكٌ لِلْجِهَادِ صُورَةً وَمَعْنًا, right? However, if you are fulfilling the contract based on a benefit for the Muslimin, then that is considered jihad in at least in essence, maybe not in physically, but otherwise, if you're not doing that and you're just carrying on for the sake of it, then that wouldn't be allowed. وَلَا بُدَّ مِنَ النَّبْذِ, and this happens all the time. As long as they say we're no longer, and you give them enough time to tell them, right? وَلَا بُدَّ مِنَ النَّبْذِ تَحَرُّزًا عَنِ الْغَدَرِ, the reason why you have to throw it back and cancel it, right? What it means by throw back is cancel it, right? And you inform them of it, is because you don't want to betray. You don't want to do it without that. You don't want to do it while they still think they got a contract with you, because that is wrong. And then he says, وَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ اعْتِبَارِ مُدَّةٍ يَبْلُغُ خَبَرَ النَّبْذِ إِلَى جَمِيعِهِمْ, and you have to also give them enough time. You can't just send them an email or send them a message and say, look, we've broken, and then just start attacking them. You have to give them enough time for it to get through their masses, right? That this is we're no longer in a peace situation. Otherwise, it's going to be seen as betrayal and as treachery, and that's not allowed in Islam at all, right? Yes, what happens if they literally break it first? وَإِذَا بَدَأُوا بِخِيَانَةٍ, if they start off with a treachery or betrayal and they attack you despite having a peace treaty, قَاتَلَهُمْ, then you're going to have to, then the contract's gone, they've broken it, then there's no contract, then you fight them. وَلَمْ يَنْبِذْ إِلَيْهِمْ إِذَا كَانَ ذَلِكَ بِإِتِّفَاقِهِمْ, this is as long as their leader or their majority have agreed to this. Now, if a small faction did it, then don't punish their whole army for that, and don't break it for that. Then understand that these were, you can say, heretics, or these were extremists on one side to try to cause a big issue. Diffuse that situation rather. That's why he's saying that as long as this was with their agreement to break it and come about you, then there's no agreement left. Because in that case, they would be the ones who have broken the contract and the covenant, and there's no need for us to now break it because it's already broken. As opposed to if only a group of them came in and did something, they attacked a few people, they stole a bit of stuff, they actually don't have much power, except in a small level, they just went a bit crazy and did that, then that's not going to be considered as them, unless you find out that that was a strategy from the top up to do this, to provoke. Okay. Now, if this small group is sufficient and significant in the sense that they have their own defenses and everything, and they're not doing this like hidden, but they're openly fighting with the Muslims, then it means that this would be treated because they're significant, right? And why could they not be reined in? So in this case, it would be significant, and then they would have to pay. Sorry, that means that the contract will be seen, the covenant will be seen to have been broken, and then after that, the Muslims will be allowed to fight back in that regard, right? لأنه بغير إذن ملكهم ففعلهم لا يلزم غيرهم, as opposed to when it's just a small group and you know that it's not from there, unless you can find out that it is the case. حتى لو كان بإذن ملكهم صاروا ناقضين العهد. Yes, so even if that small group, it was done with the approval of their superiors, of the major army leaders and so on, then that means that while the major army hasn't attacked you and they're making it seem like just some rebels, but you know that it's theirs and you better know 100%, then in that case the contract is broken as well, right? So hopefully that clarifies. So to conclude this lesson number 8, we discussed that once the war is inevitable and you have to attack them because of them refusing any other option, then you're allowed to set up all of your equipment, right? You're allowed to burn some areas to assist. You're allowed to flood certain areas. You're allowed to cut some trees down. You're allowed to destroy their crops. It also says that if we're ever confronted with an issue where they put up a Muslim as a shield, right, you would still be allowed to attack them, or if some Muslims are still found within the areas and they could be maybe killed as well, as long as it's normally a minority situation, right, and or they use that as enemy shield, you're still allowed to fight. But in that case, what you have to do is, your intention is the disbelievers and your intention is not the Muslim, because that's at least as much as we can do, right? Otherwise, if you would just desist because they would put up Muslims, then that means that they're going to find Muslims to put up, and then you're never going to be able to do anything. Likewise, there's a saying that it's okay to take women with you, and also Quran with you, and any other religious books, right? As long as you're normally assured that it's a big enough army that you're not going to be vanquished, you're not going to be overcome and so on. Otherwise, it's not allowed to take these, because then they will denigrate these items of ours, and they'll denigrate our women as well, right? That's why it's not allowed in smaller contingents that are more critical and more dangerous. Likewise, it says that women are allowed to fight with you as long as as long as it's a general kind of war and it's a survival issue. Otherwise, you have to take their permission. Muslims are definitely not allowed to steal from the booty without the Amir's proper distribution, and they're definitely not allowed to go against covenants. They're not allowed to go against covenants. And the only reason they would be allowed to go against the covenant, which is not really going against it, is if the other side breaks the covenant. There's a description of how that's broken, so we did that as well. That if a small group breaks it and not the majority, then that's not, unless they are authorized by the main army people or the main leaders of the enemies that allow the rebels to do it, then it's also considered broken. Likewise, we're not allowed to kill women and older people and disabled people and children and so on, unless they're somehow taking part in the battle, right? Then there was a discussion about whether you can have a peace treaty. Yes, if the Imam, the Muslim leader, decides that it's actually better to have a time of peace, a period of peace, to make some peace with them, it's completely allowed as well. Whether that be with some payment from them or from us, depending on the situation, that's allowed, only as long as that is the best thing to do. for the Muslims. Otherwise, you're not allowed to do that, and then you are allowed to throw back the contract in the sense that cancel the contract. But then there's conditions in there that you have to allow them to know about it and to be informed about this. Otherwise, it will be seen as a deception and a betrayal, and that is a breach of trust, and that's not allowed. So that ends our 8th lesson. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a proper understanding of this, and we carry on inshallah in the next section. Inshallah, lesson 9. We'll see you there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.